Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 141, and as you can tell, I have our great lawyer, Canon Alan Haley, with me. We're going to talk about some more legal news, some breaking developments today. November 25th, 2014. Okay, as I alluded to, there's breaking news, and no, we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Ferguson later, but there's breaking news from Illinois, not Missouri, where the Supreme Court there said, not so fast tech. Well, that's more lay speak. That's not what they really wrote down in legalese. What did they write down in legalese, Alan?
Denied.
Denied.
And what they said was, Ekisa, your petition for leave to appeal up to our Supreme Court in Illinois to review the decision of the Court of Appeal in Quincy that ruled in favor of the Anglican Diocese of Quincy and its ability to pull out of the church. They said, Ika, your petition, we're not going to hear it. It's denied.
Yeah, this is one of the many cases where a diocese wanted to leave the Episcopal Church. The Episcopal Church fought it in many different grounds, right. Whether it's a Hail Mary, whether it's saying people can leave, but churches and dioceses can't. Right. Here we finally had a judge say, no, there's nothing in your documentation and there's nothing in the Constitution that prevents the diocese from leaving.
Right. The importance of this decision is it's the first one from a state high court that answers this question definitively. In other words, the trial court over a year ago gave a very full analysis of Ekisa's governing documents, the Constitution and canons, and said there's nothing in these language or in these documents that prevents a diocese from withdrawing. And so the Diocese of Quincy properly pulled out. Ekisa appealed that to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal took a look again at the same documents the trial judge did and said, yeah, he's right, there's nothing in there. And a diocese is free to leave the Episcopal Church under the First Amendment. We all have freedom of association, including dioceses. And so we can join what groups we want and pull out of what groups we want. And that's the constitutional rule in the United States, and now it's been affirmed. Now, you mentioned many cases of dioceses. There are actually only 3 other cases pending in the United States, but now this decision, because it's the first decision from the state's highest court to consider the question, is going to be precedent, citable as precedent in those other 3 cases, those being in Fort Worth in Texas, the San Joaquin case in California, which is on appeal, and the current case in South Carolina, which is still down at the trial court level.
Which is amazing because you've always went to the judges and they never had anything they could look at and say, well, I can decide it based on this. There's
Correct.
Always been this mishmash. The Episcopal churches put up kind of this fog machine of information that goes on and says, listen, we have these rules and they're violating rules and they have to stay with us.
Right.
We finally have a court that says, and a Supreme Court that says, no.
There's no there.
Right, there's no
That's
there.
what I like. I like it because, in other words, the Episcopal Church, it always tries to paint itself as this huge, big, humongous, hierarchical entity. And in reality, it's just a group of dioceses who get together every 3 years in General Convention and pass some legislation. But when General Convention is not in session, which is 99% of the time, all there is a bunch of dioceses on their own, each one in its own territory doing its thing. And that's all the Episcopal Church is. And then at the course of the lower level, it's all the parishes where all the mission work gets carried on and so on. But the dioceses themselves, just because it have a presiding bishop and a staff at 815 2nd Avenue in New York does not mean that the Episcopal Church is some humongous monolithic entity. It's not, and the courts are able to see that now.
That's good. So we've talked about this now for 4 minutes, 13 seconds. The audience is going to want more than just this. So I wrote back to Alan and said, okay, we got the decision. Can we also talk about the nature of the grand jury? Because
Sure.
there's a lot of questions going on in Ferguson about this isn't fair, what's happened here. Of course, the cop is guilty. And let's talk about the nature of the grand jury, because that's really not what people understand the court of law to be about. We understand that we have the right under the Fifth Amendment to not speak if we don't want to. We have the right of have our spouse not speak against us in court. There are guaranteed rights, but the
Correct.
grand jury is a secretive type entity, and that's harder for us to understand because this is the great transparent America. Tell us how the grand jury works.
Okay, well, first of all, you referred to certain constitutional rights, and one of the most important of those rights is the presumption of innocence.
Mm-hmm.
So the grand jury, like everybody else, starts out with the idea that the accused person that it wants to consider, whether he's considered a crime, has a presumption of innocence. And therefore, the grand jury's deliberations in secret are intended to protect that presumption of innocence and not be conducted. Well, it's only if the function of the grand jury is to decide should charges be brought and should they be made public, and this person have to go through a public trial and defend himself. He still has the presumption of innocence, but the whole issue of a grand jury is whether charges should be brought in the first instance by the prosecutor. And that's why we call it a grand jury. It's much larger than the trial jury. The trial jury only has 6 or 12 jurors. Grand jury frequently has 18 or more. And the prosecutor has to convince a majority of those jurors that there's a good case to bring against the person who supposedly committed a crime. And in the course of its work, this Ferguson grand jury, of course, as I understand it, heard from more than 60 witnesses to the incident. This took place in broad daylight on a downtown street in Ferguson, and there were lots of people who watched the whole thing play out. It was over in a matter of a minute or less. Mm-hmm. And so they had testimony from all points of view, I mean, literally physical points of view standing around the street, and different types of people, some in their shops, some on the sidewalk, some driving in their cars, and so on. They heard them all. Anybody who wanted to come forward and testify and had seen something, they heard them all. And when they added up all that testimony, they decided that at best the policeman had acted in self-defense and had certainly not gone out of his way to commit a crime such as manslaughter or even worse, murder.
It's not just testimony. They take evidence. They take a lot into account.
And they heard from the police officer himself, of course.
And testimonies from the police officer and other things.
As well as from Mr. Brown's companion, the one who was arrested along with him, but did not do anything to provoke the police the way Mr. Brown did. And he gave his testimony too. So the jury had really both sides there. It's not like it was all, as they have been saying in the newspaper, one-sided. But the main point to carry away from all this, Kevin, I think, is that people need to be realizing that we're not there in Ferguson. We weren't there to sit through the hours and hours of testimony from all these witnesses. That was the function of the grand jury. It did its job the way it's supposed to under American law. And it needs to be respected as if it's American law. The people saying, oh, the jury didn't do the right thing or didn't know what it was doing, what they're really saying is, we don't respect this legal system in America. Because when it goes against what we want done, let's just junk it. Let's try it out, throw it away, and try something else. Well, that hasn't been the whole point of fighting for liberty over centuries, to keep the freedom of trial by jury.
And I must admit, even though I was not happy with the Obamacare decision from the Supreme Court, I did not say throughout the Supreme Court. And there are things, instances within our history that we're not going to be happy with. That's right. The nature of blind justice. Justice
Correct.
Is blind. But we always say justice is outcome. And I keep reminding people, justice is access to the system. America has the greatest justice system in the world. And even the greatest justice system in the world fails at times. We just let a guy out of prison who was wrongfully convicted 36 years ago.
Years ago. Right.
And you're like, how does this happen? Well, somebody lied. A person in testimony lied and said he was the guy. Well, how did something like this happen in Ferguson? Well, we learned that the companion who was with Mr. Brown lied. And, everybody's testimony contradicted Mr. Ferguson's relative who was with him at the time.
Right.
And that's the nature of the blindness, is sometimes the lies get through and sometimes they don't.
And unfortunately, yes, this whole thing has been turned into a tool for more racist division and strife in the country than is healthy. And I'm very sorry that the leaders at the top, who should be able to do a lot more to cure that, they've kind of held aloof and have watched it play out on the ground with minimal commentary and minimal attempts to set a pattern for people to follow. I was reading a piece by a person who grew up in Ferguson, now lives in Ireland, but that was his rural neighborhood. He went trick-or-treating there, he played in the gym there, and now he comes back from Ireland and sees all these scenes of his neighborhood on television with things burning, people rioting and looting. He can't recognize it. He can't recognize it as the neighborhood he grew up in. And he said it was a multiracial community, very at peace with each other. Everybody had their businesses, their stores. Now that's been wrecked, and it's been wrecked in the name of some person's, that's persons plural, view of justice, quote unquote, that they disagree with the rule of law and they want to see things rather trashed and burnt down, people driven out of business, rather than respect the rule of law that they live under.
Well, we've been, and I don't know if I've said this before, but we've been sold a lie. One of the lies we've been sold is that our multiculturalism unifies us.
Yeah,
and it doesn't.
It used to. It used to.
It used to be part of the melting pot that unified us. What unites us...
Everybody went through the process. The immigrants, new immigrants, found jobs and worked in the lowest paying jobs and gathered money and sent their kids to school. And each generation improved itself. And that applies to every generation that has come to America over the years until just recently.
Yeah. What does unite us is a constitution, the strive for the freedom that it promises, the individualism and self-determination that's promised to the Constitution, and the ability of the people here to respect the rule of law. That's what unites Americans. Multiculturalism doesn't do it. Multiculturalism is our DNA, nothing more.
Yeah. And as I said, it also, when you set poor examples up at the top, when the president himself has no respect for the law, it's hard to demand for citizens that they show some respect for the law. But even if the president doesn't show that kind of respect, we've got to maintain it. Otherwise, our country falls apart. Without law, you don't have anything to glue the country together and hold it in a framework that everyone respects, because the law is truly supposed to be blind and impartial if it's applied as law. If it's applied as a tool to oppress, if it's applied as a tool to keep down and keep under, then that's wrong. I agree. And that is not the way law is supposed to work. And we all, those of us who have been trained in the law, know how to understand and appreciate the system when it works as it's designed. It has worked as it was designed in Ferguson. And I would ask everyone to just calmly respect that fact.
Well, I want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving, Alan. I don't smell turkey cooking over there yet, but how's the weather over in California?
It will make for nice outdoor turkey roasting.
Ooh, good stuff. Behind me, behind the screen, is about a foot of fresh snow, and we will also have a wonderful Thanksgiving here. We thank you for watching and being viewers of Anglican Unscripted. We thank you for your prayers, and we thank you most that you respect the rule of law.